Shalom, Boker Tov. And unfortunately, that's where my Hebrew ends. But you have translation. It's an honor for me to be here as well, and I won't go into a long series of thank yous. I think we actually need to start in we've had I echo everything that Rami and Hillel said. It's an honor for me to be here in Israel, and in some ways it's a homecoming for me. I lived here when I was a very young child, and as maybe age 4 to 7. So I remember a few things, and I got the opportunity to go to the Mount of Olives and have a celebration at my great-great-grandfather's brother's grave, which was a little bit removed, but still nice, and gave me a sense of the history here. And there's a history here in social services as well. And I've visited a few places and met a number of people, and have really been impressed with the level of clinical skills here, frankly. And I've said this a few times already, but I would say the level of clinical skills here are at least as good as, and probably often a lot better than the skills I see in North America. So understand that what I'm going to share comes from that place of saying, I think you're doing a lot of things really, really well. What I'd like to do, and hopefully what my colleagues will do after me as well, is share with you ways perhaps to improve what you're doing. And not coming from a place of really knowing, hey, well, these folks should do this, that, the other. We're coming, at least for me, I'm coming from a very different system. So I hope that some of the things I say actually have some application here. I think they do, but we'll leave that for the discussion. So with that, I will continue on. So we have a lot of talk about evidence-informed practice, evidence-based practice. It's discussed all the time in many jurisdictions in the U.S. And in Canada, and really everywhere. It's required, but we don't always know what it is. It's not very clearly defined. If you ask two people, similar to many experiences I've had in Israel, you'll get two different opinions. What is evidence-based practice? What is evidence-informed practice? And frankly, I'm not sure that it's been implemented entirely. And maybe it's one of those things that never really can be implemented entirely. But Brian Sheldon has given us a definition, as have others, that evidence-informed practice is the conscientious, explicit, and judicious use of current best evidence in making decisions regarding the welfare of service users and carers. When you think about, well, my picture didn't show up. Darn. Yeah, well, it's. I have such good cartoons, and I suspect now that we won't have any of them. The picture here was a person at a desk with about 10 feet of paper piled behind her, about to fall all over her, and she's overwhelmed. And that's, in essence, what we experience sometimes in social work. So we have an overwhelming stream of information coming at us. We don't know how good that information is, yet we're supposed to use it to do something. The state of knowledge, as Rami indicated, is constantly changing, so we have to keep on learning. And we also have the potential to cause harm. I think about things like Scared Straight in the U.S., where they brought kids who had problems with maybe they were reported for crime, and so they take a group of them to prison, and they have them meet with the inmates, and the inmates treat them as if they were prisoners. And this is supposed to scare them into not doing crimes anymore. And it turns out that the kids who got this intervention actually committed more crime. And if nobody ever looked, you'd never know that. And politically, it's an odd thing because it's still used in some places, even though we have good evidence to suggest that it shouldn't be. I do think that not using evidence, not using the knowledge, as it were, to affect our practice has an opportunity cost. And that is that if we don't use it, then people might not get as well as they could. We might not be doing the right thing. And this is, for me, is an issue of social justice. Our clients deserve better. Our clients deserve the very best we can give them. Even though most of our clients are, they tend not to be wealthy. They tend to be a lot of times in minority groups. And we, I believe, owe them the best we can give. But the way to get at it is very difficult. And since we have this big stream of information, we need some sort of systematic way of categorizing it and assessing its applicability to the folks we're working with. So what is evidence-informed practice? Again, there's a lot of talk about what it is. There's EBP, evidence-based practice, EBM, evidence-based medicine, EIP, evidence-informed practice, ESTs, empirically supported treatments, EBPs, evidence-based practices, practice guidelines. It just kind of goes on and on and on, and you can get confused in terms of what it is we're talking about. So I will define what evidence-based practice is as I understand it. And it comes out of medicine, evidence-based medicine. It started at McMaster University in Canada, and it has also been described as evidence-informed practice. And this is a process that I'll take you through in a moment. But basically, empirically supported treatments or evidence-based practices are interventions that have been found to be, by someone somewhere, effective. Practice guidelines and best practices are lists of interventions that are sometimes validated in terms of whether they have some impact, sometimes not. But it's a series of steps or principles even that people would take to provide the best treatment. And I would propose to you that all of these other things, besides EBP, EIP, EBM, fall under the broader heading of evidence-informed practice. So that there is a systematic way of looking at things. And what it is a philosophical and a practical approach. So the philosophical approach is we take current best evidence and we mix that with clinical state and circumstance of the client with their preferences and actions, and that the combination of all of those is clinical expertise. And I want you to notice that I'm not saying if you do evidence-based practice, it means you find the best clinical trial and you impose that on your clients. I'm very clearly not saying that. It is the combination of best evidence with what we know about our clients that makes clinical expertise. Okay? Clinical skills are one thing. Clinical expertise, perhaps, is another. And I would pose to you that clinical expertise involves the systematic gathering, evaluation of evidence. So, systematic. Len Gibbs, the late Leonard Gibbs, actually, who was a friend and colleague and mentor, came up with this list of how to systematically gather and use data. And it's based on evidence-based medicine. And the first part is becoming motivated to do this. And hopefully I'm the cheerleader. Please become motivated. But the first step is to convert the information into a question that can be answered by relevant databases. As this can be anything from PsycInfo or other databases that you might have, the scholarly literature, to Google as well, right? And converting this question in a way that can be answered. And there are several different types of questions. There are prevention questions. Can I stop something from happening? There are intervention questions. Can I treat something that has already happened? There are prognostic or diagnostic questions. How do I tell if somebody has something? How do I tell what the likelihood is that something bad will happen? And then we go and look for the best evidence systematically. Then we have to critically appraise what it is we've found and integrate this into our practice experience, client strengths, and values and circumstances. And please, again, notice I'm not saying that there's no place for clinical experience. There's a big place. In fact, I'm arguing the opposite. I'm saying that it's more of a responsibility, that clinical skills have to be even better because they incorporate the use of evidence. And then evaluating what's done to what effect with clients. And Len added this other thing based on Sackett's work, and that's teaching others to do the same thing, to be mentors to others. Hey, a cartoon showed up. Excellent. Okay. You might ask, as do I, is this conceivable? Can you even hope to do stuff like this? And this cartoon says, this guy, I think, is interviewing for a job, and he says, the boss is saying, can you do more work than is humanly possible? Of course, he'll say yes because he wants the job, but you know, are you able to do this? And there are challenges to this, and I readily acknowledge these. So first of all, though, I'd like to say that some of the challenges that have been raised I want to throw away right away, and that's what I would call philosophical straw men. And that is when you say that evidence-informed practice or evidence-based practice is just finding the latest, greatest clinical trial and applying it to your clients. Well, you could make an argument, and a very good one philosophically, that that's not the right thing to do. But that's not what I'm saying evidence-based practice is. So we'll dispense with those. There is a problem of lack of evidence. We don't have information about everything. And what I would say to that is that we need to be honest about it. There are difficulties in terms of access to evidence. Not everybody has the ability to log into a database and do a search. Social services are complex. What we're dealing with is not easy at all. Some people say, oh, medicine, well, you know, they've got it easy. Well, it turns out that medicine actually doesn't have it easy, and that most of what's done in medicine is probably not evidence-based. They have some of the same challenges we do. Challenge it should be seen as an opportunity, not as, oh, it's too hard, let's not do it. There is a lack of time, however, and I often encourage my students to just pick one client and start this process. With one client, you will develop expertise over time. Don't think you have to do it every time, all the time. There is a problem, which I think is salient here, and that's translation across different contexts. So what I discover in Middle America about a certain intervention for decreasing substance misuse may well not apply to a Bedouin community here, if that indeed is a problem. There's every reason to think that we might have some translation problems there. And again, I would say you don't throw that evidence away, but you think, yeah, okay. You know, I know where this study was conducted. I know what some of the issues are there, and maybe we should list out what some of those baseline characteristics are of the communities. It may or may not apply. The other thing is that even if we make the best decisions we possibly can, it may or may not be right. This is an uncertain world. Things are changing all the time. And we have to be okay with not knowing. And Eileen Gambrill would say we have to be more than okay with not knowing. We actually have to impart to clients that we don't know. I think in some respects that's a very good idea. In others, if you want some sort of a placebo effect, that might not be a good idea. And the thing is that there's no manual for integrating evidence with context. We've done a lot of work on gathering evidence and systematically appraising it, but there's no manual on how you actually bring that to bear in a client interaction. And I think that's important. And I put cognitive dissonance here at risk of spending too much time on this slide, just because of my experience. Social workers come to this job to do good. We come because we care. And the notion that possibly what we're doing might not be helpful is very difficult to hold in our heads at the same time. We certainly didn't come into this for the money. But it may be the case that some of what we're doing is not helpful, and I think we need to acknowledge that and hold two opposing ideas in our head at the same time. And then there is the biggest challenge, and that's that this doesn't operate in a vacuum, this basic model, that there are other things that some of our presenters later will talk about that may actually have more of an impact on people than that client interaction. And what I'm talking about, which should be very apparent here, is there are things like the political context, right? The organizational mandate. What are you supposed to do? How have the rules been generated in such a way over time that you have these different effects with people, and you can have the best clinical trial in the world, but maybe it's not going to work because of maybe the political context, or maybe we're not getting the right supervision, or maybe the profession isn't training people in the right way. Maybe there are such organizational constraints on resources that it's very difficult to actually do practice the way you would like to do it. We often don't have funding. We have a socio-historical context as well. In Canada, we have a very important socio-historic context with First Nations. That is, you can't talk about child welfare without talking about residential schools that were used basically to take children out of homes and teach them the dominant culture. And they would, I don't want to speak for them, but might look at that as a sort of cultural genocide, as it were. That's a strong term, but that's pretty much what I've heard them use. So understanding that evidence-based practice it just functions within other contexts, I think, is crucial. And I just want to make sure that you know one more time that I don't think evidence is deterministic. That is, it won't tell you exactly what to do in all circumstances. Sadly, it's not that simple. It's a systematic process of gathering the evidence that needs to be inclusive, critical, flexible, and our thinking needs to be flexible as well. So, the context. North American child welfare is different than Israeli child welfare, as I've learned in the last month. These are some of the things we face in North America. And we often will ask the question, is it child welfare or child protection? Are we after the well-being of children, or are we after keeping kids safe? Are we even after keeping kids safe after they've already been harmed? Being a child welfare worker as well is difficult. How do you operate and build clinical rapport, as it were, at the same time you have the power to take someone's children away? It's a pretty big stick. We asked, should the system be residual or preventative? And this is a discourse that's been going on for quite some time. Should we actually respond to things after they happen, or should we try to prevent more? And how do you balance safety, culture, community, family rights, and the individual needs of children when these things may indeed be opposing? Children's rights, parental rights, not so easy. And I think maybe you face some of the same tensions, at least from what the minister said. And how do you assess the risk the system poses to the child? And as a caseworker, when I was a caseworker, I did that. I thought to myself, not just whether this child would be re-abused when I was considering taking them out of the home, but what's going to happen to this kid if I take them out of the home? And it's very difficult to gauge, but it certainly was a part of my decision making. So there are decision points in child welfare. Here are the ones that are fairly clear in North America. I think there's similar ones here. But at each stage, at each decision point, we have places that evidence can be used. We can have risk or prognostic tools, diagnostic tools, which treatments are effective at each point in the system. There's monitoring, ongoing monitoring and evaluation, and these things are recursive because kids can come in and out. They can be maltreated more than once. I know kids tend to stay longer in the system here. In the U.S., it comes in and out a bit more. So the proper blend, how do you blend clinical skills and evidence? And how do you form a structure that teaches clinical skills and constantly creates and evaluates evidence? What I've noticed sometimes in Canada, at least, you get a tool out there, some sort of a diagnostic tool, let's say, and people come out with a pen and paper, and all of a sudden their clinical skills go away. Or maybe they never had clinical skills. Maybe you're not hiring people that have clinical skills because you think they can come out there with a piece of paper and a pen and some sort of instrument and do good practice. I would say that that's a bad idea. And I think the challenge maybe for this country is to think about how do you maintain those very good clinical skills while also starting to incorporate evidence without losing that clinical touch. It is an ongoing struggle, and yet I would again reiterate, we have a responsibility to both find and evaluate evidence and use it, find ways, but I'm not going to stand up here and say that there's a recipe, because there isn't. People are different. Contexts are different. Contexts change over time. People change over time. So, types of evidence. I'm also not going to stand up here and say that clinical trials are the only form of evidence. It's not true. They may not even be the best form of evidence in many situations. Sometimes they are. I'm not disparaging them. But it depends on the question. What are we trying to know? Clinical experience is a form of evidence. Now, how much do I weight that in my decisions? It may be based on what other forms of evidence are out there and what's going on with a client. There's also the research literature. Now, how do I get a handle on that? There are actually, and I don't have a slide or time to talk about that, but there are systematic ways of distilling the research literature so that it gets at a certain question without having to read 500 papers. There are ways to do that. They've been fairly well developed. One area that hasn't been as well developed here, that has been developed very well in the U.S. And is starting at least, hopefully, in Ontario, I've been working on administrative data. And that is, who do you have in your system, at what point in time, what do they look like, how long do they stay, when do they come in and out, what are their demographic characteristics, how long are they in foster care, who exits foster care, is it correct, do they ever come back? This is the base kind of epidemiological research that you can make very important decisions on. And everything, I think, is predicated on having information that is accessible to policymakers to make crucial decisions in terms of what interventions might work. And I think Fred and Mark will talk about that to some extent. There's also survey data. We can ask clients how they're doing. We can ask caseworkers what they're doing. And of course there's evaluation evidence. And I put qualitative research in here very purposely. Because qualitative research is quite important. When my dad was in the hospital with a heart condition, I didn't limit myself to searching for randomized controlled trials of his particular problem. The solution to his particular problem was a pacemaker. And he was scared of a pacemaker. So I looked for qualitative studies describing how people live with these things. What is it like? I didn't ask for an RCT. I wanted people's lived experience, and that was crucial to him. And in fact, that made the determination for him to go ahead, not necessarily the clinical trials. He formulated his own rubric for making a decision, but that was very helpful. So, the cycle of EBP or EIP. And when I say EBP, evidence-based practice, and evidence-informed practice interchangeably, it's a struggle I have. I think if the originators of evidence-based practice could have it back, they would switch it for evidence-informed practice, because in reality, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about being informed by the evidence, but not basing all our decisions solely on the evidence. But it's not a one-time deal. So maybe at the front end we have an actuarial risk assessment for recurrence of maltreatment. What will happen? What's the likelihood that a family will come back with a recurrence of maltreatment if we do nothing? Then maybe I go to some sort of family or contextual or clinical assessment to try to discover what is the state and circumstances and preferences of this family. Maybe I discover that I use this one. I should find a different example, but it's hard when you're on stage. Maybe I find that a mother is depressed. That's part of what's going on, and I want to, or I want to figure out whether she's depressed. And maybe I need a good tool to do that. And maybe I can find effective services for depression. And then I have to ask myself the question: are these services appropriate for this client? Are they at least willing to try this particular type of treatment? Are there barriers to this type of treatment, cultural or otherwise? So I start integrating what I know about the client with the evidence out there. And that, again, is clinical expertise. So, the last thing we want, and I think you probably can't see this, but this is or at least read it. This is a doctor with his patient, and he's saying, There's been a lot of research lately on your condition. Now I'm sorry I didn't read any of it. And I think we fall into similar situations sometimes. And I don't want to fall into that situation. I want to at least have known as much as I could possibly know and honestly move forward. So there are a few things that I want to bring to you that's helping this movement. One is the Campbell collaboration. And this is an international group of scholars, policymakers, managers who promote and conduct systematic reviews of the evidence. It's free to everybody. Just go to the Campbell Collaboration website, campbellcollaboration.org, and you can look at a bunch of systematic reviews of the evidence in a lot of different areas. We're doing more than just compiling random control trials. There are systematic reviews of random control trials, and they are statistically combined. So across studies, you know what the overall effect is. But we're also doing systematic reviews of other things. We're doing economic reviews. We're doing observational study reviews. We're doing risk and diagnostic tool reviews. And we're buddied up with the Cochrane Collaboration, which is in medicine. Cochrane Collaboration has over 3,000 systematic reviews for medicine. You know, if you want to know what to do with a kidney stone, you might want to check there first. We are a little slower, but we're also newer, and we have 50 reviews out there. Some of them have basically say there's nothing out there, be careful. Others are very richly developed, so do take a look. The other thing is we're moving into interventions in low and middle income countries. And also we have a users group that translates these big documents into readable synopses. We have Kuti here, and I think we may be close to having them translated in Israel so that you can read it in Hebrew, which would be lovely. The other thing is other folks are doing some very interesting work as well. And Rick Barth, one of our speakers, has been involved in the California Evidence-Based Clearinghouse, which is focused on child welfare. And it has looks at a number of different problems and interventions that perhaps work for these problems. And it gives you a rating scale of 1 to 5 about how good is the evidence, and another scale of how relevant is it to child welfare. And you can click on each one of these. The website's down at the bottom. And you'll get a synopsis of the intervention, what it is, how it works, and links to or references to the various evaluations of these different programs. It's as comprehensive as it can be. And in a sense, it's sort of, I don't know if Rick would agree, but it's sort of an intermediary between a systematic review and just a literature review. Maybe it's more of a rapid evidence assessment where systematic methods are used to compile the evidence. They're not meta-analyzed, but they're there for you to see. And it's very helpful. I refer people to this all the time. The third major point, the first point was evidence isn't everything, that clinical expertise brings it together. The second point really is that there's more to evidence than random control trials. And the third point is one of the ways to bring it all together is critical thinking. And this is difficult. It's not easy to do. It's much easier to think we know everything we need to know. But the problem is I don't think we do. And so critical thinking is a way of using evidence from various sources and experience in a way that might be more helpful to clients. And there are critical thinking guidelines, and we could spend a whole day talking about these, but these 8 at least seem very relevant to me. And that's asking questions. Be willing to ponder. Be willing to wonder. Defining your terms. What question are you asking? When you say well-being, what do you mean? When you say risk, what do you mean? Exactly. And think about how you might not really know the answer to that question. You have to think about it some more. Examining the evidence, and hopefully you have a systematic process for doing that. Analyzing your own assumptions and biases. We all come to this game with assumptions and biases. Postmodernism certainly taught us that. and avoiding emotional reasoning. So staying away from making decisions based on emotions is almost always a good idea. Just take a step back and think, okay, why am I mean, this is kind of psychodynamic. Why am I experiencing this emotion? And how does that relate to my own biases and assumptions? And how can I move past this to make good decisions? Considering other interpretations is crucial. Eileen Munro, were she here, might talk about people making up their minds well before they should and dismissing evidence that comes after. And she investigates child death, so that might be rather important. And tolerating uncertainty and ambiguity. I'm going to leave this slide for you to read on your own, but this is just kind of a discourse on how to, or the outcome of being a clinical thinker. What does a clinical thinker look like? And check out Elder. She's got some very good stuff on how to think critically. So critical thinking is about not being one of these. And the sheep standing up in the back is saying, wait, listen to me. We don't have to be just sheep. Let's be critical thinkers instead, and move the field forward that way. Not get in this discourse about, is it evidence or is it clinical skills? No. It's everything. It's the whole ball of wax. And my challenge to you is that is a lot harder than doing either of those things. Much harder. And the challenge is to rethink our view of what knowledge is and how best to facilitate its rapid generation, sharing, and application in a manner that closes the policy, research, practice gap. That's as good a summary as any, I suppose. But I think we'll be hearing from great speakers after this. In fact, we'll be hearing from someone very good right after me, I think. And as a parting shot, I would like to think about evidence-informed practice as much broader than people mostly conceptualize. But that doesn't mean you just do what you want. Oh, look, I've got this evidence, I've got this that I know about my client, I'll put it together. It is a systematic process, and it's for us to discover how to do that in a way that makes a difference. So that's it for me, and I will turn it over to Rami.
Thank you.